Inside Outer Limits is a regular feature on the Paranormal UK radio network. Everybody, once again, and welcome to another edition of Inside Outer Limits. And today, as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. Philip Mantle, the lead man, the top dog at Flying Disc Press.
Good evening, Chris. Yeah, I have to be the top dog because there's only me in it.
Well, exactly. But that means you're top teamer and your top editor and top designer. So there you go.
I am, and I'm the boss in this house, and I've got my wife's permission to say so as well. So
exactly the same in my house. Well, we've got a very interesting show lined up this evening, or today, depending where you are in the world. And I'm actually talking with my old cohort from the Outer Nowhere radio show, which is my co-host from that, Mr. Paul Sinclair. Hello, Paul. How are you?
Hello, I'm good, thank you, Chris, and hello, Philip. And I wouldn't have really called myself a bit of a co-host, really. I think I soon discovered that you were better suited to this than me. But yeah, thank you for allowing me to say a few words and talk about what's happening today.
That's absolutely fine, Paul, absolutely. So, since we last spoke, Paul, on the air, on the radio, as it were, what's been going on? What have you been up to?
Well, as you know, and probably Philip as well, we never really switch off from subject, do we? And I've found myself involved in a really absolutely riveting case. I think I'll be talking about this at Outer Limits. I was going to talk originally about my own experiences, but without going into it just feels a bit weird talking about them. I have done on radio odd times, but I don't know if I stood in front of people. I've geared up. I've started a PowerPoint to do that. Anyway, I'll not labour on that. It's about a location about 9 miles from where I'm sat now called Hummonby. I'm sure both you guys will be familiar with it, the sort of geography of this place. It's in between Bridlington and Scarborough, just set inland off coast, about 3 miles inland. And Hunmanby, I'll just tell you what the name signifies, Hund Man, farmstead of the Hound Man, which is interesting in itself. We're not going to do cryptids today, I don't think, but simply because it's 3 miles from where all the stories originated, the Flixton werewolf, and we've got a place here in ancient times called Hundman, and it actually does mean farmstead of the Hound Man. But let me just carry on with the story. Sorry, guys. So I found out about the story quite by accident. An ex-military man who runs the finances of a working man's club in Flamborough were having some guys paint the club for him. They were doing painting and decorating. And I actually know the painters and decorators who live very close to me. And one of the lads used to work with me, or for me, probably 10 years ago, his son. And this is what's amazing. They've sat on this story, or his dad has, Andrew, that's his real name. He's allowed me to record him. He sat on this story for over 20 years. And even though they've known me, when this story happened and knew that I had an avid interest in this subject of the unexplained and UFOs, just like we all do listening to this, never told me, because he was so... They'd gone into themselves with it. They didn't want to share it with anybody, not out of any kind of greed, just the ridicule factor. So they're painting the club, and they gets talking to Jim, this guy, and who's ex-military, and he's got an interest in UFOs and things, and the subject of UFOs must have come up. And young David, the son, said, "Why don't you tell Jim what happened to you at Hummonby?" So his dad, a bit reluctant, told him this story. Well, unbeknown to Andrew, the witness, he didn't know I knew Jim. I hope I'm not confusing people here. He didn't know I knew the guy who was in charge of the finances, and Jim immediately said, "You must tell Paul Sinclair." Well, ka-ching, Andrew thought, well, he actually only lives round corner from me, and I've known him over 20 years and never told him. But he couldn't wriggle out of it. So I got hold of the story, and I asked Andrew if he would share it with me, and I went up to his home, and I would think about 3 months ago, sat for over 2 hours with voice recorder, and I've spoke to him since, and I've spoke to all 3 witnesses since, and got this incredible story. So in 1996, 1997, these guys, when we'll call them real name Andrew, real name Dave, different name Steve. Andrew and Dave worked for Steve. He doesn't want his name involved in this, but I have spoke to him face to face. He's very reluctant. So I've changed his name, even though I'm not giving a surname. And they worked for Steve on the industrial estate in this big unit, this big workshop, 96, 97, 98. For the 3-year period, on a night, it was a second job. So they would do their day jobs in Bridlington or around the local area, and then in the evenings they'd travel through to Hummonby, and sometimes they'd work till 11 o'clock at night, and all the guys say sometimes we'd work till 3 in the morning, and on a weekend we might actually work through the night. It were quite lucrative. They were good quality craftsmen. Andrews was a sign writer, or still is. The other guy sprayed vehicles, and the boss, Steve, sprayed vehicles, high-quality vehicles, Daimlers and MGs, and they got open-top buses into Signwrite and Restore, and fairground rides where they put all the pictures on, so you get an idea of what they were doing. Mm-hmm. Now, I need to. We're here for an hour or so I want to describe the unit because it's important. It's a huge building with roller shutter doors on it, front and back, that you could drive a double-decker bus in and out the other side, and a huge car park and rough scrub area at the back, or at least it was in 1996, 7 and 8. It's all, the industrial estate's grown since then, as people can imagine. So, to the story. Every night and Dave's mum and dad used to come most nights of the week from Bridlington and spend a few hours, I suppose, with their son, maybe bring sandwiches, I don't know, and a flask, and talk to the guys, and then they'd travel back, probably 10:30, back home to Brid, and they just used to come, and that was that. These two they're ill, and they don't want to talk about it. They've been asked, and they won't discuss it, but I've got the son's version of what happened, that they were witness to a lot of the things. So in 1996, in June, these guys have dated all this. They know the approximate years, or the years, but they don't know the exact time in June it started. But about June, Andrew was in the workshop alone. The other two hadn't arrived. And it's just a big open workshop, but in the bottom right-hand corner there was a small toilet block. Above that there was Steve's office, and above that probably an 8 to 10 foot space of just area where there was stored all sorts of rubbish and things, and it was a former engineering unit. So there was nuts and bolts and washers in little boxes all over the place. That'll become key in a while. So he's doing a bit of sign writing on his own in June. And in the corner of his eye, he just caught something which he thought moved off the roof above the office. A piece of wood, a piece of 4x2, about 2 foot long, just flew straight past his head. And he looked. There's no one else in. There's a few vehicles in the place. And he sort of carries on working. He didn't hit him. It didn't hit a vehicle. And he's just thinking, there's somebody up there. And he's sort of got a wry smile on his face. I mean, they're in the 60s now, these guys, but, you know, he's fit enough to climb up on a ladder if he wanted to then. I suppose he still is now, but he's just kept an eye on it. And then he hears at the side of the unit. You can picture the corrugated sheeting of the unit. It made quite a bang. And he thought, what the hell's that? And he looked to his right. And you do realise, guys, I'm saying he looks to his right. He could have looked to his left. But what I'm saying is he looked. But as he looked, there's a bang at the opposite side. And he hears a tinkling sound. And he's intrigued. He's not nervous at this stage, but he's intrigued. And then the other two arrive, and he realises it weren't them. And he says some strange things have been happening. He tells them that things have been like a piece of wood's flown past him, and he thinks he's come off that roof space. So they get a ladder, and he gingerly has a look over the top, and there's just nothing there. You know, little light bulbs and washers and bits and bats, but nothing of any significance. And that's the night, basically. And then Dave's mum and dad arrive, and they tell them. Then the next night, they hear more wax on the side of the building, and they go over to investigate, and it's a steel washer. and it's projected from somewhere. It's launched itself through the air. Nobody sees where they come from, and whacked the side of the building. Bear in mind that it's completely enclosed, this building, so there's nothing that anybody could throw at them. And this continued. This sort of built up this bizarre activity, which they didn't know what to attribute it to, and it was sort of drip fed to them to such a degree that they became accustomed to it. And a few other lads in units close by, they told them strange things were happening, but nobody else had experienced it bar Dave and Andy, Steve, and Dave's mum and dad. So it got to the light bulbs would suddenly go all bright in the workshop, and these big sort of bulbs above hanging above on strips, and then the power would cut. But these words are the words of all three people I've spoken to. The radio would carry on playing, and it wasn't on some kind of thing where it had just tripped the lights. Everything had gone. They'd unplug it, and the radio continued to play. Yeah, which is impossible, isn't it, guys? We know this, but that's what they're telling me happened. So this sort of carried on, and they got through the year. It sort of built and built. So we got June, July, and August, and it sort of peaked in August. They'd got lots of activity, lots of things. Suddenly, outside there was a gravelled area for the cars at the front, but somehow the gravel would just drop in front of them inside the unit, and then gravel had dropped behind them, or a coffee jar had just appeared from the air, and I don't mean thrown at them, it had just dropped to the floor. So they were all absolutely enthralled. They found it quite exciting as it was happening, this invisible force were moving things around in the workshop. And another interesting thing, none of these things seem possible, but knowing the integrity of Andrew as I do, I can't believe that we've got three men now, Philip and Chris, that have not actually they've not spoke to each other, these guys, in 10 to 15 years. When I spoke to Andrew, he didn't even know any contact details for the former boss. But we managed to get him, and I've been and spoken to him. So there was a calendar hung on the wall from the former occupants, the engineering unit, like you know what I mean, a booby calendar, a paper one. And they all guys, I suppose, all sort of red-blooded men do, and they're looking at this calendar, maybe a bit sexist, and they pick the favourite month and what have you. But every time they came in, it was on August. They all agree. Everyone, I spoke to all the guys separately, and they all say somehow this calendar used to go back to August, which once again is impossible. It implies being taken off the wall and turned, or the radio being unplugged when it's running off the mains and still going. It just doesn't seem possible. I agree with all what I'm sort of saying. I'm not contradicting myself, but I'm going on the word of three men, all in the 60s, that have experienced this, and this guy's mum and dad. So this unexplained phenomena continued till the end of till August 1996, and then it just seemed to cease. It petered out. So they worked through to 1997, and in June 1997, as you can guess what I'm going to say, it started again. Washers, all sorts of things bouncing off the walls, in all directions, and nobody saw anything. That's what's interesting. And they had, as I said earlier, they had high-class motor vehicles in this workshop to be sprayed, and nothing ever got damaged. Nobody got hit. Well, we'll come to that one, but nobody got hit at this stage, and nothing got damaged. The light bulbs would explode, go bright and explode in the workshop, and you'd think, well, there's been some kind of power surge, or there's something wrong with the electrical circuit of the workshop. However, to sort of contradict all that, the radio always played when it was plugged into mains, and they unplugged it, it still played. It changed channels on its own, all sorts of things. All three men, no contact with each other, are all telling me the same story. I've recorded 2 of them. The guy we've changed his name didn't want to be recorded. So, and on an evening then in 1997, they'd parked their vehicles outside, and they'd come outside, and there'd be little neat piles of gravel on the bonnets, which they couldn't understand, because they'd go, obviously somebody could be doing this, but there's nobody in the workshop that's projecting these steel washers about and doing all this. And they said they came out one night, and all the cars had huge animal prints on them. Said like a dog print, but as big as a human. Now, guys, I'm only relating what I've been told. I didn't expect to be told a carbon copy story of all 3 men who've not had interaction with each other for so long, but that's what they're telling me. And they haven't a clue. The bonnets weren't damaged, the roofs of the car weren't damaged, and it implied something big had been on these vehicles. But there's animal prints on the vehicles. So all of this sort of continued, and then mid-1997, excuse me, Steve rented off a part of the area of land at the back of the workshop, because it was a huge area of parking where you could get lorries and other vehicles, but at the back of that, which was still part of his building, it was scrubland. So while a guy, I'm told, who wanted to strip down caravans and sell parts, reclaimed caravan parts. So while they're clearing the land, they found a grave marker. I want to call it a gravestone, but it was made of wood. So what would it be called? So I've called it a grave marker. And it was dated the 1800s, and it were inscribed with a little girl's name. They know it were a child. So from that moment, they attributed this activity to a poltergeist. That's what they perceived, all this excited energy and things moving around the workshop. The reasons for it was, and they're saying it was a poltergeist. I mean, I'm not saying it wasn't. We'll get to more of this in a minute. So whilst they found this grave, and they said they didn't have a lot of respect for it, which is a bit sad, really. And they didn't say it flippantly. They said in them days we just moved it about the workshop, and everything that happened would get a bit of a brilliant flash of light, or in the workshop, or a bulb would burst and the power would go off, and we'd just say, oh, it's the poltergeist. And there was one other thing as well that Dave picked up on, and I did confirm it with the other 2. He said, well, odd times whilst travelling to Hummonby, and odd times whilst driving home, and always driving home late at night, he said suddenly there'd be a flash of light, just a split second, and it would be daylight, and then it'd be gone. I don't know what kind of energy could produce that. He said, because we know it could be lightning or sheet lightning, but he said there's another odd thing. He said, I can sometimes remember driving there, and I remember driving home and being on the road, and suddenly being on the road driving home and thinking, I don't remember arriving, and I don't remember doing anything there. I can remember going, and I can remember going back. I know I've just broke into the story a little bit there from the other things, but I think it's worth noting at this stage. So because it may be connected, but he can't remember anything in between. And I asked Andrew and I asked Steve if they'd had any experience of this period of missing time like David had, and they haven't, or they've no recall of it. They've recall of the land lighting up like daylight just for a blink, but none of this missing time or apparent missing time. So nobody believed them. They told people around the neighbouring workshops and what were happening, but nobody really believed them. He says, but on one occasion they were inside workshop with a customer. He says we were all sat in the front of a recovery truck, all 4 of us. So we've got this big recovery truck, and we sat there, and there's a customer talking to us. We're discussing what we're going to do. He says, and there's a bang on side at workshop. He says, and this guy looked. He says, well, none of us said anything. He says, and then suddenly there's another one. And then there's another. He says, and he said, what's that? He says, oh, it's just poltergeist, don't worry. He says, and He says, and that's how flippant and how blasé they were about it. But obviously, this were happening, and they were telling people these things, and that's why they went into the cells, because they got labelled as being a bit crazy. No, there's three nutcases there. I mean, and Dave's mum and dad experienced this as well. He said there was another time. I hope I'm not boring you with this, guys, because I've got this.
No, at all, mate. Carry on.
Intrigued.
He said there's another time. He said we had an MG Roadster in, and we're all in the workshop, all three of us, and the keys are in the ignition, and this MG just started on its own. All three of them have said this. The car started up. He said for a moment we all sort of ran outside. We couldn't believe it. But we went back in, he said, and Steve, the boss, went, he says, he took the keys out of the ignition, turned it off. Well, tried to, but it didn't stop. They had to pull the bonnet and disconnect something on the car to finally stop the engine. And they called the auto electrician. I'm trying to put the point over about why they've been so quiet about this. And they relayed the story to the auto electrician and what exactly had happened. And he just laughed at them and put the word about that they were crazy and they're saying all sorts of things. And, it's just the total nuts, because these things can't happen. So the caravan guys, there was one man that lived in a caravan on the back. And one day, this is Steve recalled this one to me, the boss, he said, he actually got quite stroppy with me and we ended up having a massive argument. Because he came to us and he said, I'm absolutely fed up of the radios going on the cars parked out the back, the locked cars parked at the back on a night. Multiple radios are going off on starting and playing music on these cars. Horns are beeping. All this activity is happening. Well, obviously, Steve couldn't do anything about it, apart from just say, well, what do you want me to do? We've told you there's strange activity in and around the unit. But he were held somehow responsible for this, and, the word got about that they were to blame for it. But obviously, they weren't. It were like some strange, invisible, paranormal coating were all over this area in 1996, 7 and 8. So, once again, in August, things seemed to dissipate and go back to normal, and sort of normal life is resumed. Now, I haven't got to 1998 here, and you might not want to add your comments, but I just want to know what you perceive of this at the moment, Philip or Chris.
Well, the only thing I remember is something not as active as that, but it was my father-in-law telling me about one of his friends' houses, and their TV used to come on even when it wasn't plugged in, and that's the only thing I can say about being anything similar.
Yeah.
I mean, we've all heard about poltergeist activity. There is some speculation that such activity would be related to a person that's perhaps approaching puberty.
Yeah.
And there was a famous case, I believe it was Austria, and things weren't getting thrown around, but the light bulbs were going and things like that. And they had a huge chandelier in their offices that used to swing. But they had a young lady work there, and she was reaching that age, and they got a phone bill. Now it was a huge phone bill, so they got a printout of all the numbers, and this is the days of the old dial numbers, not like the mobile things we have now. And the phone was dialing this particular number faster than you could actually do it yourself, so you couldn't spin the dial again and stick your finger in and keep going, and they put it down to her, but. With this instance that you're talking here, you've got grown men. There's no youngsters there of that nature. So all I'll say is it's bizarre and fascinating in equal measures, Paul.
Yeah, and I don't know whether you've had experience of this, Chris, but when you get to 1998, you might start thinking different than a poltergeist. these guys were on the same page. I mean, with the poltergeist, and I'd be due to finding the grave marker. However,
yeah.
1990.
Well, my own experience, which I think I've actually related to you once before, Paul, was walking down the road with myself, my wife, and my 2 stepchildren, and I was walking next to an edge, which had metal railings next to it. It was outside an old Victorian school in the Hull area. It was on Queen's Road in Hull, if anybody really wants to know. And these metal railings had a privet edge behind them, which was approximately 3 to 3.5 foot wide, something like that. And walking along, and something grabbed me on my right shoulder and actually pulled me back. I actually felt like a hand had grabbed me on my right hand shoulder, because I was walking right next to the fence there, and it actually pulled me back with such force it stopped me in my tracks. And obviously I wondered what the heck was going on, and I'm ready to jump round and slap somebody, and there was nothing there, absolutely nobody there. So I would put that down to some kind of poltergeist experience. Yeah. And the term poltergeist does mean noisy spirit.
Right. Okay.
You know, it's from an old German word, and they are known for throwing things around, hitting people, moving furniture and all that kind of stuff. But you've intrigued me more because you've not mentioned 1998 yet. I want to know what that's about now.
1998 is sort of the culmination of it all, and like I've just said, they attributed everything to the grave marker. It's a pity they didn't take a picture of it. I've got some pictures at Unit coming. Dave took some when he actually worked there all those years ago, so I'll get an idea of inside. I've been to Unit and took pictures of it as it is today, and spoke to the new occupants. There's probably been more than one lot since 1998, but they've never experienced anything. But 1998, June once again, the calendar changing to August. All the guys stress this. I mean, as much as we might trying to visualise this in his minds and imagine how it could physically change, a paper calendar that's probably hung, I would think, or pinned to a wall is beyond me. But that's what they're saying, and the steel washers hitting the walls and no one appearing to get hurt. But they're blaming it on the poltergeist. So it started slowly once again in June. But there was an added element in 1998, and money started to fall from the air. Old money. Nothing they could spend, really, and pesetas in front of them and behind them. The radio, as we've said, would change channels and suddenly go loud. And I won't say they were sick of it, but they probably by this time they were actually sick of the attention that they'd received from people. I think we've all experienced this, yourselves and listeners who are interested in the subject of UFOs, and you mention it, and you're guarded who you mention it to, because if you're if you're close to some narrow-minded, sarcastic devil.
Yeah, it's known as the ridicule factor, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, well, and so they suffered this, and I think they'd had enough of it. So they put the grave marker outside. Bearing in mind, originally it was in the field when they were clearing the scrubland, but they put it outside the back roller shutter doors, close to them. And they're sort of working in the unit one evening, because all their work, apart from on a weekend, was after 6 or 7 o'clock. And it's leaning up against these doors, and they've all said this. They said there was a huge bang on the unit. I don't know whether they said there were 1 or 2 bangs, but they likened it, and you can picture the thin steel of the roller shutter. They didn't make a big whack if you hit them with a baseball bat, and that's what they likened it to, bang. So they heard this huge noise, and they knew it were outside the grave marker, so they went down to investigate the doors gingerly, because they thought somebody had whacked the doors outside at the back of the unit. But unbelievably, the grave marker, they said, was inside, lent up on the inside. So all 3 of them have said this, and they said, we never saw anyone move it, we never moved it, and that's what they're saying. And then they said there's another time, we've got an open-topped bus in for restoration, spraying and sign writing. And Andrew said that he was working on it, he was sign writing. And suddenly the light above the open-top bus which is interesting because one of you guys has just mentioned a light. Went very bright. It was a huge strip with more than one light on it, not a strip light. And it fell into the bus. It just went very bright, the light, and the whole lot, the strip light, just fell into the top of the bus. Made a right mess, they'd said. I don't know whether it damaged anything, but obviously you can imagine it's made a mess. With that, the power's cut, but the radio continues to play, which is plugged in and unplugged. It's still playing. So this is becoming a bit disturbing from them. It's gone from being exciting to being a bit disturbing, and they're upset about this, and especially Steve, because he's got these high-end motor vehicles in, and he's thinking something's going to get damaged. So they decided to cut. They don't know which one of them called the church. It could have even been Dave's mum and dad. That's what they're thinking, because nobody can remember who called the church or the undertakers. But they came. He says, and the guy took one look at this grave marker, and all three of them have agreed on this one as well, that he was horrified when he looked at it. It just disturbed him. That was taken. I've rang the church, and they're looking into records for me, because apparently it's been buried in the church at Hummonby, or buried in the grounds of the church at Hummonby, this marker. I've not got any further with that yet. I've left it with them. They've got back to me once already, but I've given him a little bit more information, the vicar there. But so that's what they attributed all this phenomena for, and they actually thought, this is probably going to cure it all. Well, obviously it didn't. I mean, I got to thinking, guys, just jumping from this a moment, that this sort of blanket of paranormal activity is probably similar to what's been happening at Bempton and in places you've researched, Philip, and you, Chris. Where you get lots of sort of multifaceted phenomena, all that shouldn't be connected but must be connected because it's happening around the same time in the same proximity. Do you know what I mean? And
I know exactly what you mean, Paul, because I've just been discussing that earlier this week, and I think the problem therein lies that you're going and you'll be talking to them about a UFO sighting. That's what you're primarily there about. But not all the time, but there are occasions when if you dig a little bit further, or just by accident, I think you find in these areas, these locations, that all this weird and wonderful stuff is taking place, not just UFO sightings. One example we gave was Mark Birdsall and I, many years back, we'd had a letter from a small village in the Dales. So we phoned up, said, we'll come and see you. And when we got there, it wasn't even a village, Paul. It was just a few houses. And, of course, they had no numbers on them. So, we knocked on the door of the first one, and we asked this lady if she knew the gentleman. And she said, have you come about the ghost dog?
Really?
Yeah. And I said, what's that? So she told us about, the tale of the ghost dog that wandered down the village. And so that information came to us quite by accident. And when we started sort of taking the blinkers off, if you like, we found out that there was witchcraft had been reported in the area, that had been reported to the local police. Because originally out on some of the dales, some of the hills, they'd find little bundles of clothing. But it wasn't old clothing.
Right.
And they thought something untoward had taken place. So they'd report it to the police. And, of course, it was some kind of witchcraft that was being practiced there. Nothing devilish or anything like that, but, and so, then what we did at the Yorkshire UFO Society on Carlton Moor, just outside of Skipton, we literally camped in a caravan there for a week. Did some local press and put some signs up either side of the moor next to the road, and people came from all around the area, reported things to us, Paul, and it went back decades, and they're not just mainly UFO sightings, but they reported all kinds of things weird and wonderful. And the late police sergeant Tony Dodd was part of the organisation then. And Tony told us of a few paranormal events that he witnessed himself, firsthand, or the after effects. So you're right, mate. You can find, if either by chance or accident or on purpose, in certain areas when you have these things, there's a whole host of phenomena taking place. You're spot on there.
It makes you wonder if the area at certain times, we'll call it 96, 97, 98 here, was somehow. I'm looking at this from an interdimensional point of view, and not some spaceship that's travelling from some galaxy. Or some creature that's appearing that's come from some... And it makes you wonder if the sort of thin areas where other things unconnected to each other are all acting and playing out. I mean, you've experienced this, and you've got loads of years of looking into this subject, just like Chris has, and it seems to crop up. I mean, the sad thing is that UFO investigators or cryptid investigators just stay with their given subject and don't look outside of it, because I think it's all connected in some way. I don't understand how, but I do think it's connected. So maybe the poltergeist was responsible for moving the things around. I believe, as we get a little bit, there's not tons to this, but a little bit further into this, that you might start changing your mind, because I think one of the men were responsible for this, maybe unknowingly, but we'll see in a moment. But
okay,
obviously I'm doing this, aren't I, reading it, I'm talking this, so I've got the upper hand of what's happening. But anyway, so it's like things, they seem detached from each other, but there's some kind of unseen thread running through it all that's connecting them that I don't understand. But there's one evening, Steve's on his own. The other, Dave's mum and dad's gone home, 10, 11 o'clock time. If I'm being truthful, guys, I don't actually know what time they used to leave. I know they used to come most evenings of the week. And there's just Steve locking up. And there's no lights, it's really dark. And he's shutting the gates up. And you know that feeling, everybody's had it, where you think, you suddenly get that feeling of dread, and you turn round and there is something there to frighten you. He says he turned round, he says, and this monstrous figure stood behind him. And he's talking something like 8 or 9 foot tall, and he's not talking some bear or something. We're in UK here, guys. This is just a huge black slab of a figure. He said unbelievably thick arms and shoulders, but no detail. It was black. It was just a black shape in the night. He says, and I actually turned round and just sort of went back to gates. He said, and this thing just turned and walked into the darkness. And, that was just one little cameo of one thing that happened, just like the footprints that appeared on the guy's motor vehicles for no apparent reason. Footprints of something that were far too large not to have dented the vehicles, bonnets and roofs. But it just happened. And at odd times, they're still reporting the sky, usually on their way home, these enormous flashes of light just for a blink, and it's daylight. I mean, I don't know what kind of energy is needed to produce that effect, but all 3 guys reported this, and Dave's mum and dad had seen it. Now, the phenomenon, it didn't stop when the grave marker left. And Andrew, I mean, he's openly admitted it to me, because he's still... It says everything's just vivid in his mind still. He said, he got a bit clever with phenomena. He said, and I started shouting at it and asking it to produce things, asking it to give me something that I can use. Give me some money I can spend. I'm sick of it. What are you throwing these washers about for? Why are you giving me old money? Give me something. He said, and Steve, the boss, said, you better stop. He said, what do you mean? He says, you don't realise what you're dealing with. So if you don't stop, something's going to happen. You must stop doing this now. He says, you don't know what you're playing with. Now pack it in. And Dave agreed. He says, Andrew just took no notice of him and kept shouting at it. Every time there were a bang of a washer hit inside a unit. And this one, most nights, I don't mean it were like 30 or 40 washers a night, but every night just about throughout June, July and August, the activity built. And he'd be shouting at it, give me the lottery numbers. And I think he said something like, if you're so powerful, give me some money I can spend. And then Steve continued to tell him that, you know, he didn't realise what he were dealing with. So he said, we're working there, we're all on our various jobs. He says, and suddenly, we've just looked, and Andrew's screaming and spinning around like doing circles on the floor, holding his hands over his face, shouting, I've been hit, I've been hit, I've been hit. I mean, he might get to listen to this, which is interesting, you know, but that's what he's told me. And he said, we're all we're just perplexed, we don't know. I don't know if Dave's mum and dad were there when this happened. He says, but he moved his hands from his face, and he'd got a perfectly round, well, first of all, he'd got a 2p coin stuck to his forehead. Right? Then when he pulled it away, he'd got a perfectly round red circle in the middle of his forehead. I asked if the coin was warm, by the way, guys, but they don't recall it being warm. And Andrew says it was the most bizarre thing because he just turned round and saw it coming towards him full circle. He says, and it was in slow motion. And I thought about that and I'm thinking to myself, how does that work? Have we got some kind of moment that he's caught up in and this is caught up in to create that effect? He said because it came to him in slow motion and smacked him in the middle of the head. And he said it hurt, and this red circle stayed imprinted in his forehead for over 3 days. All three men say that. Now, that shows intent. That shows to me, well, it is. It can't show anything else, can it, guys? If they're not lying, that's intelligence, isn't it? It's got to be, hasn't it? You know?
I've got a question for you, Paul. Do any of these men, did they or do they have any association with the occult?
Not that I know of. Not that I know of, Chris.
Right.
But, you know, I've got more out of two of the guys. When I spoke to one of them, who didn't want to speak, sort of thing, I'm not joking, and I don't mind saying it on radio, but it were almost as though these were my words to him when I got to speak to him face to face. I said, it were like I'd hit you in the face with a shovel, you were that shocked. And this guy went, and I rang up and I said, I've just been speaking to so-and-so, and I believe that you had this strange experience, 96, 97, 98, and I got this, oh no, oh dear, oh, never thought I'd have to speak about this. This shouldn't be oh, no. And it really did. I'm never going to stop thinking about this all week now. And that was the phone call. And I didn't think I'd get to speak to him, but I have, and I've sat down and I've had a few hours with him and on 2 occasions now. And there's more. There's more. Without a doubt, there's more. But at the moment, all 3 men are saying the same story. One of them has got more to tell. Whether I'll ever get it or not, I don't know. So, after this slow motion coin smacked Andrew in the forehead and left this red mark, the other activity continued just like before. I'll not bother repeating it all, but Steve said one evening he stood outside in the back of the compound where all the vehicles are parked. And there's some guys, I think there were a bus depot further down. This is still there, actually.
I think that's the East Yorkshire bus depot.
No, I don't know about that, Chris, because this is Hummonby and this is I think they restore them, mate. They break them and restore them. You know, do jobs like that. The one you're on about is at Bridlington, I think. But anyway, they're stood in the back of the compound. It's night time, having a cigarette, doing whatever they're doing. Few guys who work in this bus yard are there. He doesn't know if Andrew and Dave were there, and I don't think they were because they don't recall seeing these. He says, but we're just looking towards the sea. Obviously they can't see the sea, but it's 3 miles away, and it's coming from the sea, he said, and there's 3 of the most enormous black triangles they've ever seen. Well, never seen anything like it. I'm going to say ever seen before. They'd never seen anything like it in his life before. And he says absolutely gigantua. These things were enormous, and there's 3 of them. And they're just slowly travelling in the night, blacker than the sky, distinct, Not are these clouds that are moving with wind, and can we perceive these as being triangles? These are triangles. No lights on them. No lights each corner as people report and things. These are just 3 monstrously huge black triangles. And they're blown away, these guys. You know, Steve says, I just couldn't believe it. It's the other guys' jaws we've dropped to the floor. He said, you know, the jaws. And they thought they're going to pass straight over the top of our heads. Well, as they approached the sort of area of the compound, these things switched off. They'd gone. They just weren't there anymore. All guys are scratching their heads, thinking where they've gone. They'd not flown off, which throws me to another thing. Just break from story a little bit. Just want to throw this out there to listeners and to you two. Do you think that this kind of technology has developed some kind of thing like, I know they call it stealth, but do you think it almost octopus-like or chameleon-like, but there's some kind of intermind reaction? So when the visual connection is made with these things, they can just sort of blend and become invisible, for want of a better word. Do you think that's possible?
I mean, I remember years back now, Paul, many years back, reading in the Flying Saucer Review, which was a well-respected publication at the time. And I don't know who wrote the article, but it reminds me exactly of what you're saying there, because the article was something along the lines of, are the UFOs that mimic? In other words, they're camouflage, or they would appear at first to look like something else. And that's the only thing I can think of that comes anywhere close to what you've suggested there.
Yeah, well, go on, Philip, sorry. Oh.
So it was me, Paul. What I was going to say is, I think that there is some kind of mind connection with the UFOs or their occupants, in that they can possibly read our thoughts or what we're thinking. Yep. The reason I say that is my very first experience back in 73, which I think I've mentioned to you before, is, remember I told you about I sat on top of the hill and I saw these lights jumping across the sky, and I looked up and shouted to my friends, look, there's a UFO, guys, there's a UFO. And as I shouted it disappeared. Completely clear, cloudless sky, February evening, and it just completely blinked out, and I was never saw it again, and it was directly overhead of me when that happened.
Yeah, well, there's got to be some, I mean, call it intermind connection. There's got to be something that, because, I mean, how these things, something so huge that you wouldn't, they never saw it fly away. It literally was as though they'd turned a switch off. And it's almost as though there's some recognition from the occupant, it could be just pure intelligence that's flying towards them. I mean, or whatever's inside these things has registered that there's been some sighting or visual, but there again, they've travelled over land from the sea. You would think that they could have been seen by any number of people, but these guys saw them as they were beginning to think they're going to pass straight overhead. They vanished. Well, that night, and they were talking about it the next day, and they relayed information to Dave's mum and dad, and it was quite an exciting sighting. That rhymed, didn't it? Exciting sighting, but it caused a lot of debate and a lot of talk. And we're now in July. We're now at the end of the month, and there's more. I wish I could tell you, and it's not some kind of teaser, but I can tell you more. I'm going to finish the story, but what I'm meaning is there's more that I can't tell. But so anyway, the following night, Dave's mum and dad left at about 10 p.m. back to Bridlington. They discussed the triangles and the activity. He said Andrew, Dave, and Steve, all three of them say that it went crazy that night. The activity, there was more washers flying about and more activity than they'd experienced in the previous years, and they'd just had these three triangular craft, if you want to call them craft, seen the day before. So Dave's mum and dad set off back to Bridlington, and that's that. And they're in the workshop, the rest of the guys, and the roller shutter doors, they put the roller shutter doors up about 6 or 8 foot, bearing in mind that they'd go up much higher, high enough to get a big bus through. And it was Andrew who saw it first. And he said at the bottom of their compound, he could see what he could only describe as a classic 1950s or 60s flying saucer. He says it was there, on the ground. He said there's lights going all the way around it. He said there's a mist all the way around it. And I'm looking at this thing and I can't believe what I'm looking at. And even today, if I spoke to him, he says, it was like a film set. I think it was staged. I can't believe it, what I was seeing. He says, I didn't expect it to be that big. He said it were about as big as a flatback truck. He said there's a bubble on top of it, like a glass dome or perspex dome. He says, and I can see this figure inside it. And he only describes it as a black figure. He doesn't describe details or eyes, or it's too far away, but he can see it. And he's looking at this thing. And then he's sort of trying to work it out, and there's a bit of confusion because they were all together, but now none of them now can remember being with each other. All three of them have said that. They knew they were together. He said, and I looked and I could see Steve walking down towards this mist, and he disappeared. He said, and then for some reason, he says, I went to the front door, and at the side of each roller shutter, there's a small side door. I think everybody will be familiar with these big old industrial units. He says, I'd seen this, but I still went to look for him at front. Don't know why. He says, but there were activity at the front. He says, there were helicopters all over. He says, and they were very low, and we should have been able to see them, but we couldn't see them. He said, but this thing weren't a helicopter that were landed down there. This thing was a flying saucer. And that's his words, not mine. I don't use the word flying saucer usually, but that's what he said. He says, and I went to this side door at the front, and I just opened it. He says, and two military personnel grabbed hold of me. I'd love to swear. He says, they were right nasty, and it starts with a B. He says, horrible, hard people. He says, and they dragged me in and dropped me to the floor, and they'd got guns, and they said, stay down there, and don't move. Stay there, do as you're told, don't move. He says, and that's what I was told. And they'd got the rifles with them, and that's what they did. He says, these guys were dressed in, they weren't messing about. He says, they were dressed in black, head to toe, not camouflage gear, all in black. So that were that were Andrew's story. So he told me this, and he still believes it was surreal and staged. He just can't believe that this thing happened. So next thing, I have to speak to Dave. I want to see whether he's singing from same sheet sort of thing. And he tells me the same story. He doesn't remember where Andrew was, although they were all in workshop at the time. He doesn't remember seeing Steve walk down to the object, but he remembers seeing the object at the bottom of the compound. He doesn't remember seeing anything inside it, although he saw it, but he saw three stood outside in the mist. He said, and he's 6 foot, he's over 6 foot, this guy, and he says these things must have been over 7 foot tall. He said, and they were unusually thin. He said, and I'm trying to think how he worded the clothing. He says if they'd got clothing on, because all they could see were a black outline of the three of them. If they'd got clothing on, he says it were either a wetsuit or some like super tight clothing, and their heads looked larger than they should have been. And that's his description of them. Now, for some reason, Dave found himself at the front of the unit. He was dragged inside and told to get down by one soldier, he says, who had an handgun, so all dressed in black. So, we've got a similar story. We haven't got an occupant in the, in the craft, if we're going to call it a craft. But one other thing that Dave noted was he said he could hear the helicopters. He says, but then, when I come to think of it, I wanted them to be helicopters because I could hear these things overhead, but the sound was humming. He said, but the first thing I was thinking was, where are these helicopters above me? But I couldn't. He said, but when I really think about what it sounded like, it was a hum. It wasn't a helicopter. So...
Yeah, because helicopters make more of a thud kind of, and you can feel them in the air as well.
Isn't that what we do?
That makes
Isn't
sense.
that what we do, though, Chris and Philip? If we're involved or see something surreal or hear something, we're trying to fit it into something we can understand.
Yeah, we try and rationalise it. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think that's what they were trying to do. I mean, I don't want to take it away. There could have been helicopters in air, but it was just Dave's observation that, you know, come to think of it, he says, it were more of a hum. So, as I say, the soldier got him, dropped him to the ground, threatened him, warned him to stay down. Now, I spoke to Steve last, the boss, and he recalled similar things. In fact, if I'm being truthful, Steve told us the same story as the other two, carbon copy, really, and that he'd not had any association with them. He didn't really want to talk to me at all. I asked him, I said, Andrew said he saw you walking down towards this object and disappear, and there were a spell of silence, really, a long spell of silence, and there were no eye contact made. He was just staring into space, and he just looked at me and went, I haven't a clue why I'd say that. That's all I got back off him. But he does. I asked him if he'd seen the being. This was my last question. I said, do you remember seeing the occupants of this thing? And he said he saw one. He didn't. He saw the object at the bottom. He remembers seeing the lights, the yellow and white lights around it, flashing and arcing as well. That's what Dave said, like a welder. These lights were, and he remembers the mist. But he saw one tall, very tall, thin being in the mist. But he doesn't recall seeing its head. Don't ask me. I can only relate. You know, what these guys have told me. For some reason, he doesn't recall seeing its head. And that's basically, you know, where we're at with it. But after the event, the guys... Oh, actually, we're not. There's one other element. So Andrew had seen guys with rifles. Dave had seen a pistol. Steve said the guys that got him, he was at the front as well. So some reason he went to the front. He was dragged inside and put to the floor, but they had machine guns. I'm sorry for mixing it up here, listeners, and I'm not trying to make it sound more exciting because guns, to be honest, would have been enough for me, but I'm relating what they've told me. None of them remember being with each other, which they find confusing and I find really interesting because they were all together in unit when it kicked off, when it started. So that was the end of the event. So I don't know where... there's a little bit more, but I don't know where that fits with the poltergeist activity and the light bulbs glowing and the radios continuing to play. It's almost as though we've got to build up to this culmination of things that have just happened and ended with this event. Now, I've put word out on social media, on Humminbee web, pages and things like that, because other people must remember something about this, and I'll get to the point in a moment why. Because a short time later, after the activities died down, I mean, they've been ordered to stay in that workshop and not move, and I'm assuming everything's left by then. And they're frightened as well. The guys are frightened. These people have not messed about with them. They've been threatened. Dave's mum and dad come back. They never come back. They'd gone home. They went home. I'd love to say hours before, listeners, but I don't know. Let's just say they went home 2 hours before. And they arrived back. Mum's crying, in a right state. Dad's frightened and feeling very nervous. On the way home, there's been a military roadblock, and they've been stopped and pulled and taken out of their vehicle into the back of a black van. Not a Jeep, not an army vehicle, a black van. In there's military personnel, or they're perceiving them to be military personnel, black boots, black trousers, everything's black, heads covered, the lot, threatened. You don't say anything, you don't speak about anything, you keep quiet about this, obviously they haven't really got a clue what they're being quiet about. They knew about the triangle sightings the day before because they'd been told about them, but they didn't see them. They knew about all the activity, the excited poltergeist activity and things, but they did not experience what happened at the workshop. So they threatened, and they told the guys when they got back to the workshop that these people know everything about us. They've told me that they know how many children you've got, they know your car number plate numbers, they know everything, they know your movements, they know you're married to, they know everything. And they'd made sure that they'd told this old couple all this information. And they did. I don't know if they sent them back, but the old couple, or the elderly couple, came back and sort of relayed this. And once again, in head to toe, in black, these guys. So as I say, I'm looking. I don't think due to this talk we're going to get some witnesses come forward. I don't suppose you might do, but I think there's information packed around this, Chris, that sort of from 1998, and now you might realise why I've been fishing for information from 1998, because I think I think other things were happening. I know they were happening around the same time, and I'm trying to fill some gaps in, but that's basically the story of the Hummingbee landing, as I'm calling it, and where I've got to at the moment. If you've any comments on it or any views, I'd love to hear them, but that's up to you guys.
I mean, one thing I would say, Paul, and for anybody listening there, it's one of the reasons why they should come to the conference this year, because it's still a good few months off, so there's plenty of time, and who knows what you might acquire between now and then. And again, talking about digging for information with a gentleman earlier this week, and it would never surprise me as a result if somebody didn't come forward, Paul, because I know through my own experience that you try for a while and you get nothing, and you try again and nothing, and then all of a sudden, you think, I'll just try and dig a little bit further, just more or less for the sake of it, and hey presto, something happens. And I've had to remind people that, for example, probably the world's most famous case is probably Roswell.
Yeah.
That most of the witnesses to that, which happened in 1947, didn't come forward until the 80s and the 90s, So here we are, you talking about, 1998. There's every possibility that others in and around the area who may not have been direct witnesses to what you've just described, but also had an experience, an encounter or sighting of something that may be related or may not be related. That's up for you to decide. So I would never give in, mate, and I think you'll be surprised. I really do.
Well, do you know, Philip, I think you're right. And the way I've put it over on social media, I haven't gone into the detail we've gone into with this today, but I've just put a few paragraphs together. But I've asked if anybody recalls the military roadblocks, because that's the kind of thing that somebody might have encountered in between Hummingbee and the Dottrell Public House, which is on Scarborough Road, heading towards Bridlington. I mean, because it won't have been a regular occurrence, a roadblock set up by the military. So I'm hoping somebody remembers that, because we can. It's just, as you know, it's just another little bit of meat packing around the case sort of thing, and we will get there with it. I mean, but there's other sightings that are really interesting. I mean, and I can tell you another one if you're interested.
By all means, mate. By all means.
Well, as you guys know, I'm always up on cliff tops at Bempton, and I think about 3 months ago, were no exception. Bob Brown were up with me, and we could see a distant light, a rock angler. He'd got his headlight on, and I've told people before they fish these sheer rock faces and the 200 to 400 foot, and he's about half a mile away in distance. And we're just sat there. I set a tripod up. I don't get camera out. I leave it packed away because of moisture in air, but if it occurred, we'd put it on tripod. So it's there, tripod set up, and we sat in darkness. only interesting thing, really, what rock angler, and that shows how sad we are in, doesn't it? Really, but we're watching his head move about, and then I don't know, 30 minutes later, we see he's on the move and he's coming towards us. So when he gets to about, I don't know, 200 yards away, I said to Bob, I says, I'm going to put my light on. I don't want to startle him here, because we're just sat in dark, and we must look odd if you encountered two blokes just in the darkness. So I put light on. And as he approaches, so he's aware.
Well, I'd worry, mate, if I was approaching you in the darkness. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I wouldn't. But anyway, he knows we're there. He's aware of us. So as he draws up close, we said, "How are you doing?" and all that. Have you caught anything? And his sort of headlights dazzling us. And he says, "What are you guys doing up here?" And I told him, I says, "We're after filming these lights that have been appearing over at sea." And so he stops, puts his little box down, and he says, "I've fished these cliffs." I mean, Bob will relate this. Well, we've interviewed him now, and he's going to be in that documentary that me and Chris Turner are doing. So I'm relating what he said. He says, "I've fished these cliff tops now for 49 years. It'll be 50 years later this year." He says, "And you would not believe what I've seen up here." I says, "Really?" He says, "Yeah." I says, "Do you want to tell us a little bit about it? Have you got time?" And he's sort of... And it's about 9 p.m. actually, and so it's not that late. And he told me he'd seen unusual activity up at the RAF base first, when they'd been fishing there and tucked away years ago. We're talking like mid-1970s to 80s. He's seen groups of people going up there and descending into bunker, and we're not talking schoolboys and kids wanting a bit of a thrill, because I've got evidence now of the Satanic Cult, as in the hoods and the robes and the books that they were using, but that's for another story. That's pretty deep. That's horrible, to be honest, but there we go. So when you were talking about witchcraft earlier, Philip, in these areas, that cult, just jumping from this story for a moment, in the first book, Truth Proof 1, I talked about an alleged satanic cult. In the second book, it was still an alleged satanic cult, bordering on it could be real. Now, there's no alleged about it. They were operating down there, mid-70s to about 1995, I would have thought. And we even know what they were practicing. And it's dark stuff what they were doing down there. And I don't know whether they touched on the phenomena and somehow enhanced it or drew on it. I don't know how it works, but back to the rock angler. Sorry, guys. So he's fished these cliff tops, and then I told him about the lights we were trying to film, and he said, "I heard that you'd been up here trying to film it. We knew that you were coming up." I said, "Okay." He says, "Well," he said, "strangest thing I've seen is a UFO that landed." And he pointed to the field at back, and we're in dark, obviously, but you can see the contours of the land and the band of sky above, and he says it landed in that field over there. I said, "Really?" He said, "Yep." He says it were a fishing match. We were having a fishing match. I'd already heard the story. This is what's interesting. From the son of one of the rock anglers, he told me that his dad came home one night, very frightened, and he'd left all his fishing gear on the cliff top, but he'd never say what it was. And at the time, it later came out that he claimed he'd seen a spaceship on cliff tops. And I'm thinking, this has got to be the same night. And further into the conversation, I asked him if he knew this guy, and he did. And it was the same night. So he told me, we agreed. I said, would you tell us about it on film? And we agreed to pick him up the following week. I wanted to get the details of it. And we set a big LED light up on the cliff tops. And Bob got behind camera, and we got us both in frame. And he's talking about this story. He said, I'm fishing. He says, and it's a match night, and it's November. He says, and it's a lovely bright night, not like tonight. And the night we filmed him, it were quite windy and a bit wild. And I asked him if he knew. Yeah. He says, "Oh yeah, 1998. So amazing. And obviously, we know it's not August, but we've got November 1998. We've got a fisherman talking about a landed UFO 9 miles away from where we've got allegedly a landed UFO at Humminby, just months apart. I mean, what's happening in 1998? I find him amazing, to be honest. He said, and he said, I don't know why I turned round. He said, it could have been because of the lights of the other fishermen. He says, because suddenly things started moving. I mean, you're looking at the other guys, and remember, they don't sit together like round a pond with a little pogs if you've ever done fishing. It's not my thing, but that's what they do. They're sometimes quarter of a mile, half a mile apart, but you can see the lights in the darkness. So I turned round and looked over to that field. He says, and I thought, what's a combine harvester doing at this time of night in November? He says, and then I'm looking. He says, and I'm thinking, hey up, it's in sky. It's about 30 foot off the ground. I can see the band of sky below the land and and below the object. He says, and the other guys have obviously seen it. He says, they're not shouting, but you can tell there's a bit of animated voices. And he says, I'm watching this thing. He says, it's only over there about 500 yards away. He says, and it's slowly coming down. He says, and as it comes down, he said, there's all sparks coming from it. There's lights spinning around it all over the place, arcing and sparking and flashes and everything on this thing. He said, and as it approaches the ground, he says, the ground all around it set on fire. I says, what did you do? He says, well, you've got to laugh at these guys. I'm sorry for saying it like this. He says, well, I had a bag of fish. I couldn't investigate. I had to go. He says, but we knew we had to get out of the area any road. He says, and everybody just left. He says, we didn't want to be. But the thing that amused me when he said I had a bag of fish, I mean, to me, this would be sort of, I've got to try and document this, but this guy, more interested in his bag of fish. But I know. So anyway, that's his story. But don't you find it amazing that so much were happening in 1998? This is the same.
What is quite interesting there, Paul, is the fact that this craft coming down that he's just described to you is very similar to the description of Ummanby.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Sparking, arcing, etc. That's
correct, yeah. And there is words. I mean, as I say, he's been kind enough to allow me to film him. And I don't know what to make of it. Pete, you guys might remember this. Can you remember, I think it was 1998, but I don't know the month. I don't think they actually gave a month. That allegedly there was a giant UFO pursued over the North Sea, travelling at 17,000 miles an hour. It made the national newspapers, and I don't know if can you cast your mind back that far?
Wasn't this the one that was seen near Denmark?
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. So we've got that going off as well. Something tells me that was June or July. Well, it were in July paper, so we haven't got an actual date for it. And can you remember that one, Philip?
Vaguely, yes. I don't know the details, but it does ring a bell. Yes.
Well, I think it was explained away as a disgruntled MOD employee who put it out, and it was some kind of fictitious story. Although the newspapers of the day stood by their source, and the guy who put the story out stood by his story because he was ex-MOD, so. What
interests me about what you've just explained, Paul, this gentleman, the fisherman, is, and you will note it time and time again. When people have these encounters, experiences, sightings, whatever you want to call them, they don't actually do what you think they do. There's this amazing vision in front of him, and he's more concerned about his bag of fish.
Yeah.
I remember, and time and time again, I've spoken to people, and they've been amazed at their own reaction, and they said...
You mean afterwards, Philip? You mean afterwards?
Yeah, they thought about the account afterwards, in hindsight, and thinking, well, why did I do that? Why didn't I go and do this? So it's nothing scientific, Paul,
no.
But it's an indication when people tell you things like this, that, they're not pulling your leg. It wasn't something conventional they'd mistakenly seen. It's whatever it is, it's the genuine article, And It's like, I've heard it time and time again, and they've said, I don't know why I did that. I don't know why I didn't go and get my camera, for example. Or there was somebody stood in the bus stop next to me, why I didn't draw their attention to it and when I saw it, and things like that. This chap, is more interested in his bag of fish.
That's true. And you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, he said that, he actually said to us on the cliff tops, he said, I don't know why I didn't go and investigate it, really. He said, and I could have done. He said, but I knew I'd got to get out of the area. He says, everybody else left. He said, but I've got a bag of fish, and there's a weighing. I'm thinking, like, it's just incredible. So he's told us this story. Now, this is where it gets interesting for me. So we forget 1998 for a moment. And you know exactly where I'm going in a while. There's only us on the... Oh, there's a match. The night he's discussing this sighting with us, there's a match. Now, this part of it interests me when I talk about the light forms over the sea. Because Andy Barmby, one at Rock Anglers, has noted this. It's not really a revelation or anything, but it's not me that's noted it. But he said, I go on the cliff tops quite a lot, regardless of whether I'm fishing or not. He said, but I've noted that usually, or not usually, but when they're seen, there's a fishing match on. And they've all got these big, powerful LED lights facing out to sea, and I'm thinking, is there something happening here? Is there something we're missing, a trick we're missing here? Because this particular night, when we interviewed this rock angler about his sighting of 1998, there was a fishing match on. He wasn't involved in it. He'd been fishing, the previous week on his own. I don't know, he's getting on now. I mean, the guy's in his 60s, and I don't even know if he does match fishing. But so these guys are on cliff tops with their LED lights, miles away from us, or a good distance away from us. They can't hear what we're talking about. We've filmed him, me and Bob Brown, and we've packed the cameras away, and we're just having a little discussion on spot. 10 minutes after, the lights appeared. Unbelievably, with that being in frame, Philip, Chris, Bob Brown as my witness, the rock anglers as my witness, they appeared. 2 huge orange globes of light. We're not talking Chinese lanterns, just switched on out at sea. Suddenly, one appeared to the left of it, lower down, not on the water, in the sky, not up in the heavens. These are big orange globes of light. They switched off in sort of a sequence. Dink, 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 gone. We stood there sort of gobsmacked. I gets down for camera to film them, or try to. They come on again. Same position, and then switch off. Don't get them on film. Stand there with camera in my hand for 10 minutes. Nothing. Put the camera away, because this guy's come to assist us. Normally, otherwise me and Bob would have probably stayed there for a few hours. And he'd been good enough to come, so we took him home. Walking along the cliff tops, midway between the RSPB reserve and where we were, they appear again, a row of them. No sound, no indication of flying from anywhere, just appear. Drop the bag to the ground, go for the camera, off they go. Stand there like a fool again for 10 minutes, nothing. Camera back in bag. Just before we're heading up to the RSPB reserve, they're on again. I didn't even bother getting camera out that time. So, is there something going off here? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me, my best friend is a Norwegian chap.
I knew what you were going to say now. Is it what they call it, Hazelden? Is it what?
Hessdalen in Norway.
Yeah.
And at the height in the sort of early to mid 1980s, they were camped in the Hessdalen Valley with a whole host of equipment and cameras and so on. But it was so cold, you couldn't leave the camera outside because it would just freeze. And they'd have lookouts, and they used to have to wear protective suits. It was that cold. And they'd shout, "There's the lights." And my pal, it was called Odd Gunner Road. He'd jump out of the tent or the caravan with the camera, and the lights would go out. He'd get back in the caravan, and they'd come on again, And he's convinced that this happened so many times. It wasn't just once or twice.
I'm convinced of it.
So many times that it was beyond coincidence.
Yeah.
Whether he's right or not, I don't know. I'm just relating what he's told me. And of course, since then they have captured the lights on film and on camera, a moving camera. They have a permanent scientific station established in Hessdalen now, so it can be reviewed remotely. You don't have to have people there, but certainly in the early days. And not only that, from my own experience, I haven't seen them, but I know there were others that saw the lights when they were in great profusion in and around Carlton Moor, that again would report similar things, that they appeared to, react, if you like, to human presence. I call it what you will. Whether that is just coincidence or the way we perceive things or whatever, I don't really know. But it's not unheard of, Paul. So it has been recorded before, mate.
Sorry, Paul. I was just going to say, I don't know if you're actually aware, but there are 2 reports from Whitby on the 18th of July, 98. One at 22:11 hours, and the other one at 23:26 hours. Now, the earlier one was a bright, large, cone-shaped single object, and it was 1.5 inches in size when held at arm's length. And there was static, and it was moving in a strange line downwards. Now, whether that's down the coast or down from the upwards, from the sky down, but those are around about the same date and times as you're looking at.
That's correct. I weren't aware of them, Chris, and I'll probably speak to you about them tomorrow sometime if that's okay.
That's fine.
But what Philip's just been talking about, the lights, how do you pronounce it, Philip? Hessdalen?
Yeah, that's correct, mate, yeah.
We'd observed this for years, from probably 2006 on the East York, on Wolds, which is very close to where we're observing these things over at sea. They're probably saying things we're observing. And not famous, but a good thing Steve Ashby should say, because we'd have cameras out ready. And it's all right, we'll put cameras away, and these bloody things are going to show now, aren't they? And they usually did. So there's got to be some more than coincidence. There's something happening here, what your friend was describing and what he believed and what me and Steve believe. And I know you're probably not convinced about it, Philip, and I don't know, but I think it's more than coincidence. I think there is some kind of intelligence behind this. Just what that intelligence is, I don't know. But it's almost as if it's acknowledging our presence. It's like all-knowing and all-seeing. I don't know how it perceives what we're going to do and then reacts. I don't know, but that's exactly what happened. Me and Bob had been on them cliff tops for months and months and seeing nothing, and that's what we were going for, the intent of observing these objects.
The way I look at it as well, though, Paul, is if there is some kind of interaction there, why doesn't it happen every time? Because people see the lights, people take photographs of them, people film them, so it doesn't happen every time.
No.
It's like with abductions, right? There are those that claim that the abductors, the aliens, whatever you like to call them, put some kind of memory block on their victims that it is later removed either partially or in whole by the use of hypnosis. But then there's others that remember everything without the use of hypnosis. You think the aliens would realise by now that whatever memory blocks they were doing is of no use, because you just put somebody under hypnosis and hey presto. So it don't make a lot of sense to me. I may be totally wrong.
No. Listen, Philip, your input, your opinions are as valid as anybody's, just like Chris's are or mine. We can only relate how it makes us feel or what we think about it. Now, I've had experience of these beings, and I don't want to go off like some weirdo here, but I know I've seen them, not imaginations of a child. I've seen these beings. And all I can say is I've got little cameos of events from childhood, and I bet you there isn't a night goes by that I don't lay trying to get a little bit further, and I can't. I've never had any of this regression stuff. I don't know if I'd want to, but I never have. and they're not massive stories that I can relate to people. They're just little snapshots of things that have happened, and seeing them and seeing what's happened, and I can't get any further. But I don't know how they're able to do what they do, Philip. But I do. I don't know what time we've got, guys.
We've got about 30 minutes left.
What I was discussing recently, I mean, one of the books that I'll be publishing on May the 1st, actually, is by a Romanian astronomer, Dr. Dan Farkas. Now, Dan's first book with me was all about UFOs in general in Romania.
Yeah.
But at the end of that, he put in a chapter about his own hypotheses of how to explain, or possibly explain, the phenomena. Because what puzzled him, these are his words, not mine, are some of the stupid things that the euphonauts, as he calls them, do. That don't seem to make any sense whatsoever. So I suggested that perhaps he write a complete book about his hypotheses, and he calls it hypercivilizations. Now, you know, he is convinced that we are being visited by beings from elsewhere.
Yeah.
But what he has postulated, I'll say, is that they're not just a couple of thousand years in advance of us. They could be millions of years in advance.
And I would agree.
And the fact is that they are so advanced is that we are, when I say we, I mean we as a species, as Homo sapiens, simply are unable to comprehend them. And he gives an example. He says, if you get a TV set and stick it in an ant's nest, the ants will crawl all over it. They'll be aware of its presence. But because of the difference between us, the humans, and them, the ants, they'll never in a million years be able to figure out what on earth it is.
Brilliant.
Yeah, so that's just his idea. And he said, the euphonauts are not doing stupid things. It's just that it's not only can't we understand them, we're not capable of understanding them. He says it's like trying to imagine a new colour. You just can't do it.
Well, I think I said that to you a few weeks ago, didn't I?
You did, absolutely. And it's I have to be honest. You know, I don't pin a hypothesis on anything. My mind's changed down the years, but that's one of the things that's made me think again.
Well,
you know,
that guy's analogy, what you've just come out with, I think is brilliant. And, you know, it really is. And I think I said to you about if we tried to imagine a new colour, if you'd seen it, you'd know what it looks like. It's in your head, Philip. But how do you tell anyone else? And another thing, Philip and Chris, we've got to also, I don't mean understand, because I might be totally wrong here, but the motives of these other beings or these other intelligences, they might not be anything like what we perceive them to be. We look at everything from an angle of what we could get out of it, what we would want, how we would go about dissecting another life form or doing. But they might not be wanting anything that we actually believe they want. It might not even be anything physical that they want. It might be ocean.
I think I can give you a human example of what we're talking about. And I saw it on the TV recently, and I don't know where it was, but it's going back quite a while, and it relates to Hull.
Right.
And the first person to ever be killed by a gun was a lady in Hull. And, of course, at that period, I can't remember what period, but we're going back a long way. A gun was totally unique, right? So she walked in front of it and got her brains blown out because she had no idea what this thing was. She couldn't perceive that this was a device that could kill her. So the first person to get killed by a gun anywhere in Britain was a lady in Hull, quite by accident, because she couldn't perceive what this thing was. You know, she knew what swords were and things like that, but a gun. And I think it was same when some of the explorers and the settlers landed in what we call the New World and other parts of the world, that the natives couldn't understand, what was happening. They could recognise as humans, but certainly other things we had were beyond their imagination. So if you times that by a couple of million years, and I've tried to do it in reverse. I said scientists, and I believe them, say that the second most intelligent species on Earth are the dolphins, right? But here they are, they're floating around in the sea. They even think that they've got a rudimentary language.
Yeah.
But can we communicate with them? No. We can teach them to do loop-the-loops and catch a few fish, but actually talk to them. So how on earth would we be able to communicate and understand something that was millions of years in advance of us? The answer is it's impossible.
Impossible. Now, just before we end this, can I just tell you something else for 1998? Is that okay?
Of course you can, Paul, but what I want to do is also catch up with maybe one or two of the, older cases. Shall we say, have a quick chat with you about those.
If we haven't got time for this, it's okay. You just fire away then.
Well, what I wanted to do, the last time me and you spoke on the Out of Nowhere radio show, was we discussed Woolsthorpe.
Yeah.
And I did say to you at the time, next time we have a chat, I'll try and catch up with you about that. What's been happening with Woolsthorpe? Have you got any further? Give us a brief outline of Woolsthorpe.
The Woolsthorpe, as we've called it, the Woolsthorpe incident. I didn't know a date at the time, but it was 2009, and it was when I was running my UFO website, ILF UFO, Intelligent Light Forms, that year, and I was working quite a lot, so I was taking the reports and just adding a paragraph or a couple of paragraphs, UFO sighted, Carnaby, UFO sighted, and I'd give a brief description of what was being sighted. I'm rushing here, guys, because I realise time's of an issue. And all these sightings were building up. The police officer sighting, which I sent to Gary Heseltine, and he never got back to me, but that's another story. I think he'd probably want to now because the Woolsthorpe incident is a interesting, shall we say. But, I mean, I didn't realise the significance of it at the time when the police officer saw a black triangle rise from a field as he's driving down the road, and the car headlights dimmed on the car at the opposite side of the road, and it stopped. He went to assist, and a triangle rose from the field and flew out to sea. So I got this police officer's sighting. At the same time, there were scientific investigation unit vans parked in remote areas with these big glass bubbles on top, like a dark perspex bubble. I'm not saying that they were observing the UFO activity, but we'd got a lady called Eileen Hobson, an accountant's wife who lived at Barmston, a few miles away, and she'd observed cone-shaped objects landing in the fields at the back of Woolsthorpe at the same time. It correlated with the ILF UFO website. And what I liked about this is I closed the website in 2013, so I couldn't have dragged anything from there to bolster the Woolsthorpe incident, should I say. It was all there beforehand. I knew nothing about the incredible sighting.
Yeah, in fact, it was archived.
It was archived. It's still there. If people want to type in ILF UFO, you'll find some green text on a black background, and the internet, or whatever it is, the great machine that it is, has archived pages, and you can see the police officer citing the paragraph for it, and you can see all the references. But I didn't know about the actual event, and this event, the 16 flats at Woolsthorpe, they overlook the sea. I've said before, if you've got a stone at high tide, these people can throw a stone into the sea. And that's all there is at Woolsthorpe, nothing else. They were built by the MOD in 1935 approximately, these flats. So this couple get up to go to bed. I think it was 11 o'clock. And husband goes off and she decides she's going to check the doors locked and everything. And she goes into the porch, and there's a communal light in the middle of these. They're in blocks of 4, these flats. And she thought next door had left the light on outside, but she's able to turn it off as well. So she thought, oh, they've left light on. And sort of looked at the light, but left it and walked into the living room. And she said, as she's walking in, she said, a voice said to her, go back and look. She said, and I sort of stopped and thought, did I hear that? She says, it were in my head. And it said, go back and look again. So she did. She says, I couldn't believe it. She said, there's a huge circle, and she didn't say boomerangs. I got this out of her afterwards. A huge circle of, her words, spaceships over the sea. Very, very close. High tide. This is the strange thing. You can wade out there in chest waders. It's a very long, low, flat beach, this. So I need to stress now, and we're running out of time, that days before, the bait diggers who were employed in the harbour had seen a black triangle entering the sea. They'd seen it on 2 occasions, which sounds impossible because the sea's not deep enough for anything to go below it where they'd seen it, but that's what we're told. So she shouts her husband. He comes running through, and he can't believe it, and he's swearing. I spoke to them both, and she said, can't believe what I'm looking at. He says, it looked like a giant Christmas tree lights all in a circle over the sea. There's lightning firing down into the sea and all sorts of things. It's boiling like a big pan of hot water. Suddenly he's seen enough, and he's frightened, and he goes back to bed, puts his head under the pillow. He says he didn't want to think about this till morning, and that was it. His wife stayed and listened. Sorry, apologies, guys. His wife stayed and observed. Now, I asked her if she considered taking photographs and that, but obviously she said she didn't. She didn't want them to know that they were there, but I think there was some awareness if we can perceive that an unseen voice spoke to her. So she's observing these things. She said, and for about 30 minutes they're all in a circle, and then 2 leave at about 45 degrees and disappear, and this continued until around midnight. There's just 2 over the sea, and they just go straight up. Now, the next day, she says, the military arrived. She said, and I knew they were coming to look for these spaceships, but they'd never find them. And the bait diggers, they walked onto the beach that same night, and they were accosted by the military and ordered to leave the beach. If they're not, they're going to get arrested. The old lady and her husband said that they'd got searchlights on the sea all night. Now, I couldn't find a date for this, and going through the archives, guys, you're going to have to pull me up if I'm running out of time here. September 15th, let me get the facts right, September 15th, 2009, it said lynx sighted in Bridlington. And I thought, wow, I've got a big cat sighting here. So when I read it, it said 2 lynx helicopters, 2 Apache helicopters, 2 lynx helicopters, 2 Chinook helicopters, military vehicles, all arrived at South Shore Beach, which is Woolsthorpe, for a top-secret military exercise, which they put in paper, top-secret military exercise. It was so top-secret that they've got miles to the left, miles to the right of open beach, but they set up in front of this old lady's flat. And they stayed there for a number of days conducting this top-secret exercise. Now, I put a Freedom of Information request in, which they confirmed that it were a top-secret exercise, and they said I think the wording essentially was any explosions were simulated, any gunshots were blank rounds. Well, nobody reported hearing a sound. I think that was just fodder to fill an information.
Fill up the documentation.
Yeah, for me. And basically, a Coast Guard friend of mine who's not in the East Yorkshire area but is familiar with it, has looked into bits for me. It's all in protected archive now. He's been pulled for looking, but luckily we're looking at other stuff as well and not got too deep into it, and he's sort of okay. And there's a lesson to be learned, asking people to do things for you, because you're putting people's jobs in jeopardy, aren't you? You've got I need to be a bit more careful. But I know from that conversation that a 999 call was made. It was made to the police initially about orange lights seen travelling from Hull, orange lights seen travelling from Flamborough, and the witness says that they were approaching what looked like a black yacht sail in the sky. So that witness I've yet to find. I know it exists, and I know it's in a Coast Guard report, which I can't get because it's in protected archive. But that witness is still out there, and I'll just keep digging, like Philip does, like you do. That's all we can do, guys, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What I wanted to do now, Paul, really is, because we've got about 15 minutes left, what I wanted to do was just, I know you're a prolific writer. I do know that because of the articles you've provided for Outer Limits magazine. Also the fact you've already wrote 2 very successful books, Truth Proof 1 and Truth Proof 2. I also know you're working on 2 more books. What is the state of these books that you're working on? When are they going to be released? Because I'm certain I'm not the only person who wants to read what you're investigating.
Well, I'm frustrated about Truth Proof 3. Now, Carl Jackson, the publisher, is a great guy, and that we work okay together, and I'm happy with 2 books, but it's going slow. He's got the book, it's finished, and our promised edits every 3 days, and a few months ago, and I'm still waiting. I've had edits, obviously, I've to work through, and he's thorough. As I say, he's a great guy. It isn't really a big book, but it can't come quick enough for me. All I can say is I'm hoping it's going to be a couple of months away. It was supposed to be finished now. And, because everything's done from my end. And I've got a few drawings to do, but there's no desperation at the pace that the book's going. And book 4's finished just about. I think I'm about 70,000 words in, and that's called The Night People. And I've sort of Whitley Strieber to thank for that, for encouraging me to talk about my own experiences. And it's going to be frightening, that book, to be honest with you. And not deliberately like a horror film or anything, but I didn't realise, and probably you've done the same, Philip, when you've been writing, that sometimes you write something and you get a bit of feedback. And in the first book, when there were things I were writing about, and somebody goes, "Oh, that story was frightening," and I didn't know I was writing.
Yeah, I mean, some of the books we've done in the past, that we even had comments that the cover looks scary before they'd even read anything, Yeah. So, yes, absolutely, mate, yes.
So I wouldn't say I've deliberately made Night People frightening, but I've done it graphic because, just to touch on them experiences of my own, I'm not lying. I wet the bed till I was 13 years old. I would not leave my room. I daren't. And I daren't tell my dad because he were an hard, horrible man. And I'd say to his face, by the way, if he were here now, and he's passed away, bless him, but he were a man that would hit first and ask questions later. And I didn't tell him why. I didn't tell him why I wouldn't leave the room on a night, because I got slapped anyway, but I wouldn't tell him why, because he'd have hit me even harder.
Can I just ask you, Paul, as writing The Night People, has that been cathartic in any way? Has it helped you come to terms with some of the things that you went through?
Yeah, I were hoping it were going to take me further. I were hoping I were going to have more recollection. I thought, when I get deep into it, I'm going to remember more. And it's happened with 2 of the stories. One from about 1994 when we moved to Bridlington, and something happened, and I've got a little bit further with it because I'm reluctant. For the most part, Chris and Philip, I think you're the same. I don't want to polish a story and make it sound... I don't want to add to it just to entertain somebody. I want it to be as close to bone as possible, because you get caught out, and I don't want to lie. Do you know what I mean? And so that's how it's been. But The Night People, it's a culmination of from about as early as I can remember, because as a child, we all know we don't make a diary of things. So I'm thinking I'm 5 or 6 years old when I've got these memories. Going through life, it stopped at about 14, I would have thought, till I were about 24, 25, and started again, and then stopped. He stopped in 1998 because I've got the medical records that say, you've seen them, haven't you, Chris, where they're perplexed about the punch-hole lesions that are appearing in my body.
Yeah,
and
I can vouch for that, definitely.
Just 2 stories that have just gone a little bit further. I'd have loved to have elaborated and made them a lot better, but you can't. I've got to paint a picture. I mean, I'm not Travis Walton. He can remember the full details of his event, and other people can, but I can't. And only relate what I know,
Okay, then. So, Truth Proof 3. Do you want to give us some of the... I mean, I'm not saying go into great graphic detail because obviously I want people to buy the book.
Well,
but give us some of the items from that.
Well, Truth Proof 3, the large amount of the book revolves around the Cliff Lane story, what we talked about at the Outer Limits conference last year.
Yeah.
Because it's ongoing. You know, the objects that are being seen around this area and the animal mutilations. I didn't think I'd be moving from UFO type stuff to animal mutilations, but it seems it's all interconnected, and it's still happening. So basically, we've got a lot of stories that centre around Cliff Lane, strange triangle depressions that don't sound that exciting that appear overnight in a pea crop that literally erase all the crop and leave it just like a perfectly brown triangle in the crop. And from that, you've got people on the cliff tops coming to me and reporting seeing triangles and small black triangles flying below the sea. Above the sea, obviously, but below the cliffs. And it's just a culmination of a lot of different stories around the area. People who've I'm just relating people's experiences and people's sightings.
Yeah.
Didn't tell you much there, did I, really?
Not really, no, but that's perfectly fine because in reality then it's more... The other two books, TP1 and 2, were more for the area, weren't they? From like Farley, Flixton,
so it's more of the same.
Where with this, you're actually, it's more of the same, but more concentrated on that one area. That's perfectly fine, Paul.
Yeah, it is,
because that does seem to be the central area where all these strange and wonderful events are happening.
Yeah, and as both you guys know, for anybody listening to this, and I'm sure. There's no disrespect to the listeners, but I'm getting a lot of people coming to Bempton now, and they imagine they're going to see something. And I like in the second book, there's a guy there who's walked that lane for close to 30 years, and he's got 3 stories in 30 years.
Yeah, wouldn't it be great if things did happen?
I love
on demand.
Yeah, so we've concentrated a book full of sightings, but they're over a lot of years, and there's, as everybody, with 7 days in a week, with 24 hours in a day, and we're only there for a little snapshot, and these things just, as Philip said earlier, and we've all said, they don't perform to order, and chances of seeing something are slim. All we do know is that in areas like the area of Bempton, the areas of eye strangeness, the possibilities of seeing something are greater because people do see things in this area. I'm not trying to discourage people from looking. Come by all means, but please don't think that these lights are just going to appear the first time you come.
I know exactly what you're saying, Paul, because when we did all the activity in and around Carlton Moor in North Yorkshire, we tried our damnedest. I think I got a glimpse of it one night, but it was literally a glimpse. And we tried our best, we always said if we could get close up and personal, we would confront it in the best way we could. But no matter what, we just could not get a glimpse. When we camped out that week in the caravan, when I came home, I used to run what we called a UFO hotline. It was an answer phone.
Yeah.
But there was actually a report on my answer phone from not far from where we were staying, but it was down in the valley. So there was, from our vantage point, there's no way we could see it anyway. You know, so it was a bit deflating that we'd camped out there for a week, and yet there was a sighting on the answer phone when we got home.
Yeah.
But we used to give a kind of a fishing analogy that we knew these things were there, and because you were there, it increased your chances of catching one.
Yeah.
So you're spot on, mate. You really are.
And if you obviously if you're in one of these areas where it is a little bit more active, you have got a chance. I know there's people coming this weekend, and I'll go and meet them. It's Friday, innit? Tomorrow night, and spend a few hours with them. But I sometimes feel I shouldn't feel guilty because obviously I've no say over when this thing's going to appear or when these things are going to happen. But I think it's just luck of the draw. But I think we've just about covered everything with 1998, Chris. And anybody out there that does have any information, you know, there's a guy who you interviewed a few years ago, well, a lot of years ago, called Nick Mellors, and he had a quite incredible sighting, and I'm still trying to find information about that.
Well, I'm going to give it another go, Paul, and see if I can actually, because as you yourself know and Phil know, I did take several years away from the subject, and I'm being responsible. I didn't want to pass the information on to anybody else, even though I should have done, with hindsight, some people that I could have trusted. But I didn't want to leave information lying around with people's details on, which could be used for other purposes. So I actually destroyed a lot of information when to my shame and horror, when I walked away from the subject for a while. But I will give it another look, but I can't promise I'll find anything. Now, sorry, Paul, go ahead.
Just want to briefly say this, because I'm probably boring people with 1998, but on the 12th of June 1998, tornado, I think it was Eddie 723, crashed 10 miles off Flamborough Head. There was a lot of controversy when it crashed at the time amongst UFO-related interested parties, not myself. Talk of media blackouts and everything. But I found something, I'll make it really brief. I found a lifeboat log dated, that crashed on the 12th of June. I found a lifeboat log dated the 15th of July, 1998. And I've got the log, they're kind enough to let me have it, where the lifeboat went out to investigate a large dark object that descended from the air, landed on the surface of the sea, seen by fishermen, slipped below the sea. All this stuff's happening. We've also a Hornsey Coast Guard talked of seeing a large black triangle flying low over fields and military roadblocks set up. I haven't got a date for that, apart from it was the middle of 1998. I'm sorry about my talk today, guys, being all 1998, but I'm just trying to get it all out.
Absolutely.
No, I found it fascinating, Paul, as ever when I hear you speak, be it in person or on the phone or wherever.
Thank you.
It is always very, very interesting listening to you, Paul, and talking with you. And you know, for me, you're one of the few investigators who, for me, puts 100% into everything that you do, and I think that is absolutely fantastic that you do that. Now, I do know a lot of people will be interested in what you have to say at the Outer Limits Magazine Conference 2019, which will be in Pontefract. And if people really do want to hear Paul and see Paul with his fascinating information that he brings over, you really do need to get your tickets as soon as possible.
Well, that's great, that, Chris. And I should think that at the conference I'm going to be talking about this. However, it won't be a carbon copy, because I'm going to try and make it a little bit animated. I don't know what the projector's like or the screen this year at Pontefract. But
neither do I yet, Paul.
But that's fine. I'll try and put the images together and make them big enough so everybody can see. And when I'm talking about the industrial unit, I'll have a picture of it with the current names blanked out and everything. And we'll just animate it a little bit, and hopefully there'll be more information by then. But regardless, I hope listeners find it interesting.
I'm sure they will do, absolutely. Now, speaking for myself, Paul Sinclair, investigator, author, personal friend, a gentleman who I think is one of the best investigators of this phenomena in the world. I would just like to thank you on behalf of myself. Thank you for speaking to us on Inside Outer Limits, and I'm sure you might have one or two things
absolutely,
to say as well.
Paul. All power to your pen, mate. And I look forward to your new books, and I look forward to seeing you in August at the conference, if not before.
Okay, you will do, and it's been a pleasure, guys. And if you feel like it, put us a link to my books on, Chris, on the show.
Can do,
yeah,
absolutely. And what I shall do, I shall put a little advert together for you and put it on.
Right, excellent. Thank you, and it's been a pleasure.
And just before you go, Paul, where can they get your books?
Well, the books are available on Amazon, or Failing that, just type in Truth Proof into Google. It'll take you straight to them. And I think I have a website, which I'm embarrassed to say I have a website because I'm useless with social media or anything like that, but it's truthproof.webs.com. And there you go. Thank you.
The Truth Proof series of paranormal publications written by Paul Sinclair are a classic piece of citizen investigation. Strange lights in the sky, people disappearing, big cats stalking the landscape, werewolves in the woods, fairy folklore, little humanoid creatures and landed UFOs all feature in this remarkable series of publications. This really is high strangeness galore. You can find Paul Sinclair and Truth Proof 1 and 2 on Amazon. Outer Limits magazine are pleased to present Conference 2019, The Closest of Encounters, at the Assembly Rooms, Pontefract Town Hall, Saturday 17th of August. Join Calvin Parker, Malcolm Robinson, Philip Kinsella, Paul Sinclair, Chris Evers, 1 or 2 special guests and 1 or 2 awards. Doors open 10 a.m, first speaker 10:30 a.m, and the day ends at 7 p.m. £20 per ticket plus a small PayPal fee for the best in close encounters in Britain this year. Tickets are available from www.chris0597.wix-site.com/outer-limits-mag/conference-tickets-here. We look forward to seeing you there. Please come and be informed.